I thought real hard, and I've determined that Cinderella is the most adapted European tale of all time. Just of all Western stories ever written. Yeah, there's things like Romeo and Juliet, which have arguably inspired and influenced more stories, but in terms of direct adaptations, I don't know if there's something other than Cinderella, in terms of children's storybooks, novels, TV, films, and even the stage. Personally, I never get excited when I hear that yet another adaptation of the same story that's been done 100 times before is happening again. Not only because I love original stories as much as anyone else, but also because I feel like it cheapens the impact of adaptations when they come so regularly. Considering we barely go more than a year without some kind of mainstream adaptation of Cinderella, I wasn't all too intrigued when Team Starkid, my favorite theater production company, announced that their next full-length musical would be exactly one of those adaptations titled Cinderella's Castle. I don't mean to imply that I was upset that Starkid decided to pursue this particular project. I was happy to see that we were even getting another Team Starkid production, and I knew that I was going to travel to see it in person no matter what it was. But along with some other emotions I was feeling, I was a little bit disappointed that it would be a fairy tale adaptation, and the most overused fairy tale of all time, one that I thought could not possibly be made interesting anymore. No matter, I was still going to go see it, of course, and I would judge it then, once the entire vision had been realized. So, fast forward to April of this year, and Cinderella's Castle is finally available for the entire world to watch for free on YouTube. I had seen it the previous summer during its brief run in LA, but now I can rewatch it and listen to it and really feel the themes and the music and the characters and actually organize my thoughts. Before we get into things like the themes though, let me introduce the plot of the actual musical so you can note where it deviates from the fairy tale, because it's actually quite different. So the narrator introduces the show with the song Castle on a Hill, establishing the fantastical setting of the lands that are. We then meet our protagonist, Ella Ashmore. She's the orphan child of Lord Ashmore, who remarried after losing his wife and then died himself shortly thereafter. Now Ella lives with her stepmother and two stepsisters, abused and forced to live in filth. The town, however, thinks she's simply gone mad with grief after the deaths of her parents and ostracizes her, which they sing about in the song Cursed Crazy. But the secret, one Ella tries to expose but fails to convince anyone of, is that the stepfamily consists of evil trolls tricking the whole town into thinking they're high-born human beings. Her stepmother even fashioned her own skin suit out of magic and real human flesh, which allows her to nearly perfectly appear as a beautiful woman. The trolls are sadistic and malicious. The stepmother fantasizes about killing and consuming humankind at large, and relishes in psychologically and physically torturing Ella. Ella too fantasizes about revenge against the trolls for murdering her father and causing the downfall of her house. And this is actually the best song in the whole musical, Step on Your Grave. I don't know how it'll come to be, but I'll see you under my feet, so deep where even hell couldn't reach. Meanwhile, the kingdom's prince has been fruitlessly searching for a suitable queen, but he's a crude, self-absorbed playboy who's been rejected by every reputable house. In a last-ditch attempt to find a bride before his father, the king, dies, he invites all the high-born ladies of the kingdom to a ball where he will select someone to marry. Seeing an opportunity to seize power, the stepmother decides to infiltrate the ball and trick the prince into marrying one of her daughters. Ella's childhood best friends arrive to stay at the Ashmore family home to attend the ball, which she is overjoyed at. She reminisces about the life she used to live and how great it will be to see her friends Justine and Lucy again in the song Last Forever, which is reprised when the other two girls arrive. Feeling safe and comfortable, Ella opens up and explains that her mother was burned at the stakes by the peasants when they caught her practicing witchcraft. She goes on to explain that her stepfamily are trolls, which to her great surprise, her friends actually believe. But before they can flee, the stepmother murders Justine and Lucy to create two more skin suits for her daughters to disguise themselves in, leaving Ella distraught. We finally get to see the stepsisters, named Ransilda and Petrus, in their human forms, and the three trolls sing the song Facade. After Ella has buried the remains of her friends under the old oak, exactly where her mother was found practicing witchcraft, an ethereal, mysterious, and highly powerful spirit rises from the ground. This is the fairy queen of sweet dreams, goddess of all that is green and good. It is she who her mother had been worshipping, and who has now been awoken by the spilling of innocent blood with Justine and Lucy's burial. Through the song Ash to Ash, she offers to grant Ella a chance for revenge. She ends up giving Ella a knight and a squire created from a frog and a mouse to protect her, a beautiful dress woven from starlight capable of disguising her true identity, and glass slippers which hold all the magic together. As long as they are on her feet, the spell will work. After Ella's transformation is complete, but before we see her, Act 1 ends. Act 2 opens with the ball, where the prince meets Putris and Ransilda, and he's immediately taken by their shapely forms and shared love of vulgar puns. But before he can choose which one to marry, he and every other person in the room is struck by the sight of an anonymous mystery woman in a luminous green gown. She and the prince dance in the song Neon. Ella, who only wanted to distract the prince long enough to keep him from the stepsisters, begins to consider what it would actually be like to be queen in the song Ever After. When Ella is alone again, the stepmother bribes a guard to murder this unknown interloper, but she is saved by her loyal knight Sir Hopalot and his squire Crumb. The stepmother decides to get the job done herself, but Ella manages to fight her off and run away, losing one of her shoes in the process. She also calls the stepmother a troll, which tips her off to who she might be even as the magic obscures her face. The stepmother confronts her back at the Ashmore castle, catching her with the other glass slipper. Ella boasts that it doesn't matter anymore. The prince has announced that he won't rest until he finds the mysterious woman from the ball, and since the slippers are magic, they will burn anyone else who tries to wear them. He will spend forever trying to find the woman who matches the shoes, never marrying one of the stepsisters, and keeping the trolls away from the throne. But the stepmother has a new plan. The stepsisters hold Ella down while she sings the song Watch, about how the Ashmore family is finally crumbling to nothing, overtaken by the trolls. She saws off Ella's leg to be added to Putris's skin suit so that the slipper will fit her. Ella then dies. The prince agrees to marry Putris when she successfully dons the slipper and reveals that she has the other half of the pair, after which the three trolls sing a reprise of Watch. The show cuts to the wedding, at which Putris marries the prince before all three cast off their skin suits to reveal their troll forms. She immediately bites the prince's head off while the stepmother announces her intention to feast on all the wedding attendees, make suits for all the kingdom's trolls, and bring them forth from their caves and bridges to live in the daylight for the first time. But before she can do so, Ella appears, having been raised from the dead by the slipper returning to Putris's foot, which was really Ella's foot, alongside her knight and squire once again. Ella is now clad in armor made of starlight, which kills the trolls on sight, turning them to stone. She sings a reprise of the Fairy Queen's song, Ash to Ash. Having defeated the trolls, saved the kingdom, and gotten her revenge, she pays tribute to her fallen friends and parents with the song Trappings of Starlight. She learns she is to become queen, as technically the wedding between her legal stepsister and the prince counted, and the king has finally died, leaving her the next of kin. She accepts the responsibility and vows to rule the kingdom fiercely but benevolently. We see what becomes of the characters in a brief flash forward, and finally the whole cast sings a reprise of Castle on the Hill to close the story.
I'm not your Cinderella. I'm your bad Cinderella.
No, I'm not talking about Cinderella's castle here. In 2021, titan of the musical theater industry, Andrew Lloyd Webber premiered his own version of the classic tale, first called Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella, then Bad Cinderella when a lightly modified version was transferred from the West End to Broadway. You might be familiar with this musical from its universally bad Broadway reviews, weird marketing, hot topic-style costuming, book by promising young woman and Saltburn director-writer Emerald Fennell, vaguely incestuous song Man's Man, hasty closure which included informing the cast members via email 1 hour before the public social media announcement, ending Andrew Lloyd Webber's streak of having at least one show running on Broadway for 43 years, and of course, the multitude of video essays trying to answer how this happened. I recommend all of them. I never saw this musical on Broadway, but I did see the West End version via other methods, and must admit, the YouTube reviews were kind. It is bad. But most relevantly for us here, the thing that made me so furious at the writing, the thing that makes me say our reviewers might have actually been too kind to this show, is that it is the most sexist thing put to stage in a long, long time. At least I certainly hope so. Like, it is Misogyny the Musical. It's supposedly about societal rebellion, challenging the status quo, but it's so cowardly in its themes that it ends up being completely incomprehensible. It's about a girl who stands out from the crowd for aesthetic and allegedly also moral reasons, but it's entirely unclear what makes Cinderella less mean or shallow than the other townspeople. She hates them for judging her, but also admits that she looks down on them. Her most emphasized trait is that she doesn't care about how she looks or what other people think about her, but the second she hears that the boy she likes won't like the way she looks, she gets herself a makeover and then admits that she looks so much better and wonders why she ever rejected such a thing. And she's supposedly a rebel, but the most transgressive action she takes against the monarchy is vandalizing a statue of the dead prince and ends the show by marrying the new crown prince to become the next queen. Not to mention the voice of the musical outside of the main character. Oof. I don't want to get into it, but let's just say disparaging 99% of women and pushing misogynistic stereotypes in order to accentuate how your girl boss main character is so not like them is not in fact feminist messaging.
Have I done something to annoy you?
Not you particularly, no, but all of you in general. Yes. Sweetheart, I'm waiting for someone. It's not you, and by the way, you're delusional. You think you're hot stuff, you're not quite that pretty. With each desperate outburst, your chances are shrinking. Miss, you've had enough of whatever you're drinking. And if I'm not right, there is no chance you can win it. Excuse me, I must choose a ride in 1 minute.
It's a mess, not because it's a complete catastrophe with no redeeming qualities, but just because it's all over the place, an actual hot mess of disparate ideas that don't gel together. Should we be surprised that Bad Cinderella is so thematically weird? After all, it's both a classic fairy tale and a musical theater production. Two media not known for their transgression towards the status quo. In fact, you could argue fairy tales were largely written to define and defend the systems of society, which often include a literal monarch, a black and white guide to good and evil, and stereotypical gender roles. And musical theater, especially the kind that's able to premiere on Broadway, is a medium that, for various complicated reasons, isn't prone to challenging structures like class. So while fairy tales and theater sometimes share priorities, choosing the latter to write your fresh and daring take on a princess story was always going to be an odd choice. It's not shocking that its misplaced restraint undercuts any attempt at any theme. You can watch this video to learn about how Andrew Lloyd Webber's politics may have played a role in this inconsistent writing. So I think that's a pretty good argument against stage musical Cinderella adaptations, at least anything that bills itself as a subversive, modern take. But then we got Cinderella's Castle, and answering whether this musical manages to pull off its aspirations is much more complicated. I don't want to mislead you or keep you in suspense. Cinderella's Castle is much, much, much better than Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella. Like, it's an actual good musical. That's not the part that's hard to determine. But like the other Cinderella, this musical attempts to be a new take on an old tale. Now, it didn't market itself as modern, feminist, or transgressive. It actually committed pretty wholeheartedly to the fantasy aesthetic. Although being a Starkid production, audiences were right to assume that it was aiming for darker, more adult, and more mature than most retellings. So it merits asking whether this adaptation justifies revisiting an old tale better than Webber's property, which definitely did not in my opinion. And to answer this, we need to first define what this show was even trying to do. Cinderella's Castle is not a very complex musical. It's exactly as straightforward as it needs to be to communicate its themes, while also hinting at secondary ideas that you could ponder on if you really wanted to. I would argue that the main ideas of this show are the arc of the main character Ella, the topics of gender and sexuality, and the theme of power, and these absolutely overlap and intertwine. It must be stressed that this musical is what I would call character-driven as opposed to idea-driven. The central ideas are big and grand, but vague. Good versus evil, dark versus light, beauty versus ugliness. A classic fairy tale in that sense. But what keeps the story going is the character of Ella Ashmore. She was the first element that really intrigued me. Compare and contrast Ella to almost any other characterization of Cinderella. Cinderella tends to get a bad rap. She's maligned as meek or passive for readily accepting her role as victim to abuse and exploitation, but this isn't really fair. Traditionally, Cinderella is self-sufficient, hardworking, humble, patient, and compassionate. She accepts her circumstances because she's usually a child who's being abused. She doesn't really have a choice. Then, as she gets an opportunity to escape her circumstances, she jumps at it. However, it wouldn't be ridiculous to call her kind and forgiving to a fault in a lot of adaptations. Some of the more recent ones imply that Cinderella's defining characteristic is infinite grace, almost to like a saint-like level. The live-action Cinderella remake presents a Cinderella who actually forgives her stepmother for her abuse, despite the fact that she never apologized for such behavior. The movie gives the sense that if you are eternally patient and never complain and just keep your head down and manage to survive, you'll live long enough to see your circumstances change around you, and you'll be rewarded for your long suffering.
Have courage and be kind.
I know you're tripping that I might switch and be brave.
Now, I don't want to create a false dichotomy between this passive, weak-willed Cinderella and the girl bosses of the modern era. I can totally understand how a real-life person suffering poor treatment but unable to change their circumstances right away could feel comforted by this idea. Surviving under abuse or poverty or the like is hard enough and itself requires an incredible level of will and endurance. But telling such survivors that they are morally compelled to forgive their oppressors, or at the very least be ready to forgive them on a dime, is itself cruel. Human beings aren't saints, nor should we expect them to be. They feel anger at the people who hurt them. Anger can morph into bitterness and contempt over time. This is fair and reasonable.
You shall be as radiant and terrible as I.
So with this in mind, let's take a look at Ella Ashmore. Firstly, Ella explicitly comes from a noble house. She remembers a time when her family seat was filled with bannermen, knights, and servants. She has been groomed for a life of privilege, maybe even marriage to a prince.
I was raised to be appraised, path was paved, dress was made, princess bride to be.
Obviously, she and her house fell a great deal when her parents were killed. She's grieving the loss of not only her old, comfortable life, but her beloved parents taken too soon. As the only person who knows the truth about her stepfamily, she is fueled by both a desire for vengeance and a simmering bitterness at the other citizens who refused to help her. Oh, and them killing her mother for practicing witchcraft probably didn't help. But being revengeful isn't her only personality trait. She's also intelligent and witty, although we mostly see this in Act 2 when she's empowered by the disguise given to her by the Fairy Queen. Compare her to the protagonist of Bad Cinderella, who is in many ways on the opposite end of the spectrum of Disney's live-action Cinderella. For brevity's sake, I'll just pull a RuPaul and call her Bad. As previously mentioned, Bad openly admits to hating and looking down on the townspeople. She hates them for their vapidness and bullying, although a lot of this is more tell than show. She is constantly sarcastic in a way that is clearly meant to be her clever sense of humor, but also comes across as abrasive, not just to her supposed enemies, but to her only friend, Prince Sebastian. Many critics and regular showgoers have pointed out that Bad is arguably as mean as any of the other citizens that she judges so harshly, and for not really any better reason. In contrast, Ella is not only significantly wittier and wiser, but she's surprisingly kind and courteous to others. Ella is naturally compassionate, which we see when she spares the life of a frog that her stepsisters caught for dinner, even though she will likely feel the consequences of that action. The same frog who would later become the knight Sir Hop-a-Lot. It seems like the bulk of her ire is aimed at those who personally wronged her. And above all, Ella is proud. She knows she was wronged, she knows she deserves better than her current situation, and she's self-confident enough to recognize when the rest of the town is wrong and she is right. This is also where we get to her righteous anger, and with it, the topics of justice and revenge. Ella herself pretty clearly connects vengeance to justice. This is consistent throughout the whole show, but is first made clear in the song Step on Your Grave. The song is introduced by Ella proclaiming that she often longs to die so that she could be with her father once more, but that her need to see revenge served keeps her alive. She can't imagine dying until she sees the trolls defeated for what they did to her family. I'm going to return to this theme again later when we discuss the concept of power, but suffice it to say for now, making vengeance such a major element of Ella's character is a novel addition. Ironically, Disney's Cinderella is overly forgiving of her stepfamily despite being given plenty of reasons to hate them, while Bad Cinderella is overly cruel despite never being significantly wronged by the townspeople or even her stepfamily. Ella Ashmore, having lost both her parents to murder and now suffering daily torture in her own home, has more motivation than anyone to either feel overwhelming bitterness towards life itself or to fall victim to despair. But instead, she strikes the perfect balance of complicated feelings and displays the full range of human emotions, from joy to fury to grief to amusement to devastation to hope.
Thank you so much. This is amazing, amazing, amazing women.
Well, I've danced around the F word long enough. Tons of Starkid fans walked away from this musical pretty convinced that it was the company's most feminist show to date. And based on how most people define the term when it comes to storytelling, it's easy to see why. It was only their second show to feature a female protagonist, not including a few shows that were more ensemble-driven. Almost all important characters are female, including the villains. The Prince Charming of the story is just a misogynistic idiot played for laughs. Female rage, female vengeance, female friendships. At first, I thought the feminist read of the show was just that simple. Surface-level elements that were apparent to me on my first ever viewing of the show back in LA in the summer of 2024. But the more I watch it, the more I realize that the feminist themes go far beyond standard girl bossification of the main character. The musical's criticism of men is also deeper than just calling Prince Charming a gross pig or the king an incompetent old fool. It bears mentioning that there is no love interest for Ella here. The prince is so off-puttingly vulgar and stupid that you never root for him and Ella. She does get to flirt with the prince's put-upon right-hand man, a clever but exhausted attendant named Thaddeus. He is clearly taken with her immediately, and she with him, but their love story isn't explored in this show. Instead, they're left as friends, with anything more left for audience extrapolation. I honestly think this is genius, not because giving Cinderella a love interest is inherently misogynistic at all, But just because 90% of sexist writing comes from writing about the relationship between men and women poorly. By excising the love story from the plot, we get to 1. Focus on more interesting themes, and 2. Remove the risk of the love story undercutting these themes. I'm not saying that Starkid couldn't have written a feminist egalitarian love story, but they didn't need to, and if they had forced one into the musical, well, that wouldn't be conducive to good writing. Plus, this is Ella's show. Her triumph comes from her revenge story, and landing a man would have been no more than a side plot if it was included. Without a doubt, the most interesting theme in the show is the idea of appearances and facades, specifically how they relate to sexuality and women in society. It's especially intriguing considering the otherwise unchallenged trend throughout the show in which the ugly and disgusting is associated with evil and the beautiful with goodness. In fact, one of the only major issues I had with this musical when I was first dissecting it was this idea. Like, I'm fine with a good versus evil dichotomy, but equating physical appearances with good and evil can be harmful. But we'll get back to that. This idea is mostly communicated through Ella, who is of course a beautiful woman forced to live in squalor, disgusted by the trolls' love of filth and ugliness. The idea of facades, however, is presented through the trolls. It's a little more subtle, but there is a running theme, almost a secondary plot in its own right, about how human beings, and particularly men, can be fooled by sexuality and femininity. How the trappings of womanhood encourage men to set aside rational thought and therefore be used for manipulation. In short, how men's superficial nature can lead to their own downfall. In attempting this, the trolls have to impersonate human beings, of course, and they do so by stepping into their skin, wearing their clothes, and adopting their mannerisms. This acknowledges how womanhood is constructed, unnatural, and even disturbing at times. The villain song Facade includes many lines in which the stepmother teaches her daughters how to mimic young human women and how to seduce men at the same time, very deliberately conflating passing as a woman with being attractive towards men.
What you see's not what you get. A booty trap for other boys. I'm good to play the part
Until I break your heart.
And of course, the best part, the bridge. I especially want to analyze this lyric.
Where do I end? And my body begins. Cause everyone knows that the beauty's within.
The characters deliver this so sarcastically, like they're mocking the audience for the old cliche that it's what's inside that counts. And think about that. I was so eager earlier to criticize the musical for decrying the ugly as evil and the beautiful as good, but now the trolls seem to be calling my bluff. Oh, you think it's what's inside that matters? Really? If what's on the outside doesn't matter, why do we need to take on the form of beautiful young maidens to even be allowed to leave the house in safety? If Ella were as ugly on the outside as us trolls, would you be so quick to sympathize with her? It's almost like both Ella and the trolls agree that beauty does matter, but their standards of beauty are inverted, therefore pointing out how such standards are arbitrary. I honestly think the trolls here are saying that appearances do matter and that they will affect how others treat you. They are accurately assessing how humans judge based on appearances, especially in how they judge women, and challenge the audience to doubt them. They don't care about living up to human standards of beauty whatsoever, but they still have to if they want to survive in a human's world. There are a few moments that point out the ridiculousness of their scheme and mock the humans for their inability to see through their facades. First, Ella remarks that you can clearly see the seam in the back of her stepmother's neck where her suit is sewn closed.
She's wearing someone else's skin. Can't you see it? The seam on the back of her neck. Why can't anyone else see it? Has the world gone mad?
Later in the finale sequence, the stepmother explicitly boasts,
If one of you came wearing our hide, we'd sniff you out in an instant. But the manfolk have always been blinded by the soft and supple flesh.
There's also the genius costuming move of giving Rancilla and Putris's human forms both crazy hair and ill-fitting dresses with bodices that don't start and end where they should. Especially when contrasted with how the dresses looked on Justine and Lucy, you really get the sense that the trolls are stuffed and stretched into an outfit that they don't fit into. That, combined with their way of walking and talking, should really betray the fact that they are not what they seem, and yet it doesn't. And Mariah Rose Faith Casillas and Lauren Lopez are both gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous women, of course, but styled this way specifically does make you question what the prince sees in them. Like, he's going on about how hot they are, and you almost want to be like, really? What are their boobs doing all the way up here? But that's the point. They don't even need to be particularly beautiful or have things in the right places. They have a woman's body, the soft and supple flesh, and that does the trick for him. With that in mind, who are we supposed to condemn here? The manfolk wouldn't have been fooled if they had paid attention to more than just the women's bodies, and the trolls are simply using the tools at their disposal for survival in a world that's prejudiced against them. After all, the trolls aren't inherently evil, so why does the show want us to see them that way and rejoice in their eventual defeat? Assuming it does. Like Ella, the stepmother is filled with rage and desire for revenge. She wants to see humankind suffer for the slaughter of her fellow trolls.
Those great gray days when the sky was ash and the trolls roamed free. Before the thrice-damned sun rose once more, and the manfolk came with their fire and steel to drag my sisters into the light.
Knowing this, it's hard to wholeheartedly condemn the trolls while rooting for Cinderella. This really recontextualizes the ending in which the trolls are all either killed or chased back to the bridges from whence they came. It seems overly harsh for characters who are themselves victims of social ostracization, just like Ella. It's a complex characterization of the villain, the kind that you don't typically see in a fairy tale, but I think it does track. First of all, the stepmother isn't like Cinderella. She isn't trying to seek revenge against those who wronged her personally. She's prejudiced against all humans and seeks to murder and eat them. She is actually evil. And secondly, the show stops short of saying that all trolls are like her, because we have the character of Ransilda. So I didn't mention this earlier, but the two stepsisters have distinct personalities. Putris, who ends up marrying the prince, goes along wholeheartedly with her mother's plans for infiltrating the human world. But Ransilda is a troll's troll. She misses their old home under the bridge, prefers goat meat to human, and longs for the opportunity to ask passers-by her riddles 3. While her mother scolds her and says that they have risen up from the station, Ransilda clearly doesn't see anything wrong with living the troll lifestyle. After Cinderella rises from the dead at the end of the show, Ransilda defies her mother and runs off stage back home to the bridge, asserting that her dream is not her mother's dream, to much audience applause.
I don't want to live your dream anymore, Mom! I like riddles and eat goats! I'm going back to the bridge!
The stepmother, on the other hand, refuses to retreat or beg for mercy and is killed. It would be easy to say that this combined with the ending sends a bad message. You could say it's pro-othering, pro-segregation. That the message is trolls are fine so long as they keep to themselves and don't get any ideas about mixing with humans. So this is good to be cognizant of. In order to answer whether this message is inadvertently harmful, though, we must ask ourselves, what group in society do the trolls represent? What are they an allegory for? And the answer is nothing. The trolls are just trolls. I mean, I don't want to be reductive. At times you can read into them or their struggles as coded for various groups, but I don't think any one reading stands out as intentional or undeniable. As much as all art is political and coding does not need to be intentional to still have effects, I don't think we need to force allegories where they do not apply. This would be just as anti-intellectual as paying attention to only surface-level details and denying any kind of allegory existing. Genre stories in particular don't need to be a mediated version of reality, even though they sometimes are. They can be interesting in their own right, engaging on their own level. Honestly, I don't think the musical being explicitly anti-troll is a problem. The anti-troll rhetoric about how disgusting and ugly they are is just a straightforward joke about how they're opposite of humans, a la the Addams Family. The stepmother's sympathetic backstory is a good explanation for her fury while also mirroring Ella's desire for revenge with an example of a character who let righteous anger take over her and morph into pure, undifferentiated hate. And ending the story with Ransilda is a cute way of saying that the trolls are not at all inherently evil like the stepmother. It's the most interesting and complicated aspect of a show with otherwise straightforward standards of good and evil. And speaking of...
He's gorgeous and has a castle.
I oft forget the castle.
So, as I mentioned, despite the stepmother having a somewhat sympathetic backstory, there is still a clear dichotomy between good and evil in this musical. With this conflict comes the implication that justice is the same as vengeance, so long as it is carried out against the right people by the right people. Personally, I don't think this is a problem considering it's all used to further Ella's arc, to present her with a grand villain to overcome so that she can get her revenge and become the hero of the realm in one fell swoop. Ella is the real focus of the show. But this conflict intertwines with another big idea, that of power, and this theme gets more explicit attention. This musical has a strange relationship to power and monarchy, which isn't all that surprising given that it's a modern retelling of a very old classic fairy tale written by liberally minded Americans in the year 2024. Like, we all have a romanticized vision of the benevolent monarch in our head, but also we're partial to democracy, and we don't associate absolute power with great things traditionally. But seeing as it's still a Cinderella story, it has to end with her either becoming princess or queen, unless you want to radically rewrite the plot and especially the ending. Let's start with the Fairy Queen. She is basically power incarnate. She is explicitly neither good nor evil, she just is.
Gods are not good nor evil. They simply are.
She is all-knowing and all-powerful. On top of that, she's terrifying. She could crush you in a single instant if you piss her off. She's made of pure light that literally hurts to look at. When she asks Ella what her wish is, Ella responds that she only wants the world to be a good and kind place. The god straight up calls her a liar and commands her to tell the truth, to which Ella says, revenge.
You would lie to a god. Your pretty words are chains. Cast them aside and tell me, what is thy desire?
Similarly to the trolls mocking the adage that true beauty lies within, the Fairy Queen claims that the egalitarian, altruistic desire for a better world is nothing more than pretty words, which kind of implies that no human being is actually this magnanimous. She doesn't deal in goodness, the Fairy Queen of Sweet Dreams deals in dreams. She's here in this instance to deliver revenge to the one who summoned her with the blood of the innocent and the righteous fury in her heart. She empowers Ella to get her revenge against the people who have wronged her, to avenge her parents, and to seize control of her home once more, because she respects this instinct. Despite this, the Fairy Queen is still good, and I don't just mean because she helps Ella. She's associated with light and the color green, two things that are always connected to goodness and benevolence in this musical. And as mentioned before, this musical considers vengeance, specifically when it comes from a righteous source, just. We get this message then that power is both the cause of and solution to most of humankind's problems, in a cyclical nature.
The flames of ruination take their hold of every soul and every throne.
That corruption will eventually come from every person in a position of power, but when it does, only fierce vengeance can restore goodness.
When the light goes out, only fire is just.
That power is terrifying, painful, dangerous, but that it ultimately has the capacity for good.
You shall be as radiant and terrible as I.
Ella goes on to ponder her own power at the ball. With Thaddeus, she discusses the possibility of marrying the prince and becoming queen.
The prince is much like his father, spoiled, weak, and witless. If anyone is to rule, it will fall to his lady wife. She will bear every responsibility and partake in none of the glory.
Ella responds that she doesn't want this, that she couldn't possibly bear this burden. She goes on to sing the solo number Ever After, though, where she interrogates that instinct further. It's not necessarily that she wouldn't want it, more like she's afraid she'll fail. Like she said, she's never really thought about it before.
Kings rise, kings fall. When hope dies, is a queen called.
This line acknowledges the cyclical nature of power, while also subtly nodding to the feminist themes of the musical. I don't think Starkid is literally saying, monarchy is fine as long as it's a woman because girl boss, although yes, there are some people who do genuinely believe that a woman holding power is materially better than men holding power, even if everything else is exactly the same because women are more naturally benevolent and less prone to violence or something. Whatever, I don't think Starkid is saying that. I think Ella is wondering if her place in history is to be one of these rulers, if she is the change that is necessary, if she is being called to be the hero. After she considers if living with pain has eroded the last of her fears, she's decided she's ready to take on the burden of power, of being queen. We know she's decided to accept it because it's what she tells the stepmother in the next scene.
How dare you! You don't know who you're speaking to.
And you're speaking to your future queen.
Of course, Ella doesn't marry the prince, but does become queen. So you might conclude that this show is wholeheartedly embracing monarchy, or at least an idealized version of it. But I didn't tell you how the king dies. Thaddeus just murders him.
Perhaps he smothered himself with that pillow.
He straight up hates him so much for his incompetence and failure that he just kills him in his sleep, clearing the path for Ella to take the crown. As a result, if you really want to extrapolate the show's official position on monarchy, it is anti-monarchy. Like, it believes in monarchs, but also believes in murdering them if they're doing a bad job at ruling, which isn't really what monarchy is. Ella came into power not out of birthright, but divine mandate. She was basically chosen by the fairy queen based on her virtues. Compare her with the king and the prince, two men born into power who carelessly squander it, or the stepmother, a usurper who wishes to claim the crown for selfish and malicious reasons. In a way, Power is the namesake of the musical. I always thought that Cinderella's castle was an interesting name for the show. Sure, the castle itself is mentioned many times, and attention is paid to how it used to be a grand symbol of her family's standing, but is now decrepit and empty because of the trolls. But the castle means so much more than just the Ashmore family seat. It represents power itself. Like Power, the castle falls into different hands over the years, some malevolent and some not. Like Power, it can be corrupted, it can be made disgusting, or it can be beautiful. It requires the proper caretaker. And like Power, if the wrong person is in control of the castle, it must be seized from their hands. The forces of good demand it. So I wouldn't take any of the literal events of this musical as a political statement. I would say Starkid is endorsing a fantastical form of monarchy that doesn't and couldn't exist in real life. Exactly what you'd expect in a fairy tale, and that is absolutely fine. Not every story needs to have a literal, real-world political message. The message of the musical is entirely contained in the character of Ella Ashmore, an embodiment of the idea that righteousness and sacrifice together will let you accomplish great things, including achieving your dreams and shaping the world into a better place. How exactly you achieve these things and what you'll need to survive to get there will almost certainly be less dramatic than defeating a monster to become queen of a realm. But it's still a message that resonates regardless.
Brittany Samuel for BroadwayNews.com. Bad Cinderella is an uninspired derivative of the famous tale. I await the day when ego isn't automatically demonized, when self-actualization can be motivated by something other than love, when a heart does more than flutter or break.
Cinderella's castle marks a new turn for Starkid. While the company has made more serious content before, shows where the comedy takes a back seat for extended periods so that drama and character beats can shine, this feels like their first attempt to make a drama-forward musical. It's the first one, other than debatably Black Friday, that I would call a drama comedy as opposed to a comedy. Now, I love Starkid's brand of comedy, and I wouldn't mind if we got a more traditional comedy show for their next musical. I also love their original content, and I'm glad that Starkid took a long break from straightforward parody content to focus on their own wild and interesting original ideas. But if Cinderella's Castle shows us anything, it's that Starkid isn't afraid to take license with known properties, not just in plot and tone, but in character and themes. Cinderella's Castle doesn't just feel like a fresh take, a new twist on an old story. It feels like an original story that's themed to Cinderella. So go watch it, but don't go in expecting a Cinderella story. Trying to force this musical into that framework would only limit your ability to understand it. It's really a story of a young girl overcoming the evil forces in her life to avenge her family, become hero of the realm, and achieve self-actualization. A much more 21st century story than the original, but in a way, one that's just as commonly repeated. Maybe that's the newest genre of fairy tale. Maybe Ella Ashmore is our generation's equivalent of a Cinderella.
Let's go. Through a sacred passageway where shadows dance and play, you're guided by wonder, you're guided by wonder. In the realm of fantasy, it's sort of a factory for stories that shudder and the kingdom that loves her.
Can I just say that I do not and have never understood the Bad Cinderella logo? Like the E and the R, why does it look like that? What is that supposed to be? Like they kept it when they moved from the West End to Broadway, so like clearly they liked it. Is it supposed to be a dress? Because it does not look like a dress. Oh my god, it's supposed to be the slipper. That's supposed to be the slipper. I mean, now I feel like an idiot for not seeing it, but also I've looked at this logo for how long and never... Yeah, sure, least of the show's problems.